Good afternoon. My name is Jay Culkin. I'm one of the youth workforce development coordinators at Families Together New York State. So welcome to today's webinar. It's titled Understanding Youth Peer Advocate Code of Ethics, and it is hosted by Families Together New York State and CTAC, and presented today by Yasmin Johnson, who is the other youth workforce development coordinator at Families Together New York State. So if we are ready, I can get started with just a few housekeeping items before we get into the content of the webinar. So just a few things. Everyone's been placed on mute to avoid any background noise. If you have any technical issues during the webinar, just reach out to the host through the chat feature. And myself or Vanessa will be able to assist you. That is the person that's titled CTAC admin. We're going to have a Q&A section at the end of the webinar, so we encourage you in the chat to put your questions throughout the webinar, and we'll address them at the end or throughout the presentation, see what works out. So we'd appreciate if you'd take a moment to fill out a brief survey that's going to appear in the chat box toward the end of the webinar, and let us know if you have any suggestions or topics that you'd like us to cover in the future when you do that survey. So today's recording and presentation slides will be posted in the CTAC website within 2 to 3 business days from this webinar. So we're very excited to have Yasmin speak to us about understanding Youth Peer Advocate Code of Ethics today. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm going to pass it on to Yasmin, who will introduce herself and get started.
Thank you, Jay. So I am Yasmin Johnson. As Jay said, we have the same role here at Families Together, and that's Youth Workforce Development Coordinator. So we facilitate trainings, we oversee credential applications, and we're here for your support if you ever come across any hiccups in your practice. As a YPA, we would be like your line of defense and reference. I can switch my slide. Okay, so jumping into understanding the YPA Code of Ethics, we have all likely seen this, right, when we apply for our credential and then when we go through the advanced training. But if you've been a YPA for an extended period of time, sometimes these things can get fuzzy, and you'll learn that it can go from black and white on paper to maybe some gray area when you're actually practicing in the field. So we're glad that you're here so we can kind of clarify what these actually mean. But just to start off, a little bit about myself. I began my advocacy journey in high school, focusing on civil rights of the unhomed community at the state level in my hometown of Sacramento, California. And I continued this work in college, focusing on racial justice and equity in the community college system. And my advocacy focus as an adult has been focused upon maternal and childhood mental health as a doula and a YPA for the Youth Act team of Albany and Schenectady before transitioning over to kind of more behind the scenes work here at Families Together, which I love. I would also love to hear a little bit more about you all in the chat. Anything you'd like to share about yourself. It doesn't have to be the things on the screen, just anything you would like us to know. We would love to hear from you. You can come off of mute. And I also just want to say that if you ever have any wellness concerns or something that you'd like to message privately, I would recommend that you message Jay or CTAG admin, which is Vanessa, because I will be periodically checking the chat throughout this training, so it will be shared on the screen. So with that being said, please share a little bit about yourself in the chat or come off of mute, and also one word that represents ethics to you. And if we're a little shy, that's okay because I'm patient, so we will wait. Morals, okay, that's a good one. Anybody else? What does ethics mean to you? I see morals from Cindy, and anything about you you'd like us to know, anything you'd like to share. And you're not being rude or interrupting me if you come off of mute at an inconvenient time. That's totally okay. It's just part of the Zoom awkwardness. There's one word that represents ethics. Principles, okay? Right and wrong, yeah. And these things can all mean different things to different people, right? So we have this document as kind of like a standard for us to jump off of. But because we are all unique and individual and have our own experiences, it can look different for all of us. So that's why we're here in this training. Morals, principles from Gladys. Thank you, Director of Support Services at Manhattan Comprehensive. That's awesome. Thank you for being here, everyone. I'll give a couple more minutes too if you want to come off of mute or share. Anybody else? I know we have a lot of people in this chat, so culture, that's a good one. Would you like to share more about that, Leonardo, actually? Not to put you on the spot, you can say no. But if you'd like to share more about why you say culture is what you think of when you hear ethics, you can definitely say no. Okay, early childhood educator looking to transition from teaching to being a youth peer. Oh, that's great. So you might not have even seen these youth peer advocate code of ethics standards before if you have not applied for your provisional credential. So this is a great place to start so that when you apply and you review the document, it will already be familiar to you. Culture influences our ethics. Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. That's kind of what I was thinking, but I wanted to make sure we were on the same page. Okay. Yeah, it can be very subjective how you view ethics and what you view as ethical based on your own personal culture and what you're familiar with. And that's why this standard kind of gives us a marker. This document gives us a standard and a marker for what we are looking for in the youth peer advocate workforce when we talk about ethics. Okay, some introductions. Gladys, Geraldine, a YPA from Queens, great. Okay, a lot of YPAs in the room, which is what I expected. I'm glad. Authenticity, that is one of my favorite words ever. And you'll notice too, a lot of us in this room are YPAs, and it's very rare that you get a room of captured attention of just YPAs. So this is a chance for us to all learn from each other and the wealth of knowledge that's in the room. So please don't hesitate. We are all experts in what we do in our individual practice. So if you ever have anything to add into the chat at any point, even if I'm not necessarily asking for your feedback, definitely put that in the chat. Okay, nice to meet you all. Master's student, great. Thank you all for sharing. And if you're still typing and I'm moving on, don't feel ashamed. Please still send it. Okay, so the objectives of this training are to enhance our comprehension of the Code of Ethics, which serves as a framework for the professional conduct of youth peer advocates. And we are going to examine the policies and procedures involved in the violation review process if a Code of Ethics violation does arise, and also best practices in general for youth peer advocates. Okay, so what we're going to be looking over today is the key role of a YPA, and then we're going to go over an activity to kind of cement in that learning, boundaries of a YPA, and again, an activity, documentation for YPAs and another activity. We'll have a brief Q&A just to check in about those competencies, and then we will review violation policies, just so you know what to expect. Okay, so starting off with section 1, the key role of a YPA. Starting off with commitment to youth. What this looks like is promoting the well-being and independence of youth while keeping up with applicable laws, right? So we want them to be independent, but still within the mindset that they are youth, and there are certain rules that they have to adhere to. We are promoting youth-guided, family-driven, culturally humble, and trauma-informed practices. And if any of these terms are new to you or unfamiliar, or you would like to talk it out, just type that in the chat or come off of mute, like I said. We want to focus on the strengths of the young person. We want to view their families as part of the solution. And that can be very tricky, right? And sometimes you're walking in to a situation where there's a tense family dynamic and there might be triangulation going on. Our role is not to side with the parents and get the youth to do whatever the parents are saying, or to side with the youth and just proclaim that parents are bad guys, but to work with the families and to have them be a part of the youth's treatment and healing overall. We also want to support young people to be informed participants in all aspects of their care. So that's kind of driving in that point of being youth guided. We want to engage in efforts to reduce stigma and blaming of young people, their families, and natural support. So that's where culture comes in. Like Leonardo was saying, our ethics influence our culture, and sometimes um, I mean, our culture influences our ethics, but sometimes if we're not familiar with the culture that a youth and a family are coming from, we might see something as inherently unethical when in fact it's just a cultural difference. So that's something to consider, and we want to make sure that we are reducing stigma upon those things. We want to seek to resolve any situations in which the requirements of the agency or the code of ethics are violated. We want to, when ethical concerns happen, attempt to resolve the disagreement through appropriate channels. So this could be your supervisor, this could be maybe higher ups within your organization or your agency. This could be partnering with families together when things like this happen. And we'll go over that a little bit more. Okay, so we also have empowerment and self-determination. We want to foster hope, independence, empowerment, and self determination, self advocacy, resiliency, and ultimately recovery. And I think it's really important to remember that when you're entering into a youth's life as part of their care team through a therapeutic mentorship, that the ultimate goal is not for you to save them. For them to need you forever, but it's in fact for them to recover and graduate out of services and to no longer need services. So that's just something to remember from the beginning when we think about empowerment. We want to empower youth to voice their needs and ideas and invite them to participate when decisions are being made about their treatment and services. And this could look very simple, just if you're sitting in a med review or you're prepping for a doctor's appointment that maybe the youth has anxiety about, just sitting really quickly and just saying, either in front of other providers or just privately with the youth, like, hey, do you need a couple minutes to think about that? Or I see you're biting your shirt and you're fidgeting a lot. Do you need to get some fresh air before you answer that question? Do you understand that question? Right? Those are all within the role of a youth peer advocate. We also want to remain thoughtful and respectful of families' decisions. And this ties into cultural humility, right? Because, like I said, it's not our job to save anybody. And we might not always agree with the decisions that youth and families are making. But guess what? It's their life, it's their care, it's their treatment, it's their recovery journey. So we have to respect that. So we also want to support youth in communication and resolving and coping with conflicts within families. So maybe you meet with a youth one day and they're venting heavily about a fight they got in with their mom or their dad or their grandma. We can be a sounding board and we can validate their feelings, but we also want to support youth in resolving these issues because ultimately we go home and we clock out, but they have to live there and that's their families for the rest of their lives. So we want to respect that and make sure it's as safe of an environment for them as possible. We also want to support the young person in shaping their service plan and setting their goals. So if you're in a team meeting and there's goals happening that the youth adamantly does not agree with, then that might be a place where you can gently begin to advocate and say, this might be not be something the youth is willing to work on. Can we talk with them about it before we move forward with this? We also want to provide support that offers youth and families the least restrictive and least intrusive options and environments possible. So sometimes this can look different for different youth and different families and their needs, but just keeping that in mind. And we also want to provide current, accurate, transparent information to young people, their families, and their supports often. So just staying up to date with one example could be like mental hygiene laws in New York State, right? When you reach a certain age, you can sign your own consents, and this is what that means, right? They might not know that. So that's just one area where you can begin to advocate because you are staying up to date on that information. Okay, so moving on to competence. As a youth peer advocate, we want to provide services with the maximum skill, knowledge, and advocacy provide services within the boundaries of YPA training and expertise. And if you're not familiar, because you haven't went through the training yet, you would apply for your provisional credential, and there is a self-paced online module. And then you go to phase 2, which is level 2 of the self-paced online modules, and then a 4-day live in-person training. And then from there, with your work experience, you can gain your professional credential. So moving from the provisional to the professional. So just staying up to date and working within the boundaries of what you learned during that time. Embracing the expertise of your own recovery and resilience story. And that's what makes being a YPA unique from almost any other role professionally that there is that your own healing journey, your recovery, your resilience is part of your qualification as a youth peer advocate. And we talk a lot in the advanced training about how to navigate sharing that and your own emotional environment, right? With sharing that in a professional space. We want to have insight and awareness of one's well-being and actively practice these skills to ensure a high standard when working with young people. So because we're working in a space that by nature will likely at some point become re-traumatizing or triggering to us, right? We want to make sure that we're checking in with ourselves frequently, and maybe we're processing during supervision, or we're leaning on our team if we're in a multidisciplinary team to work together to support the best quality of care possible that can be provided to youth and families. We want to keep current with emerging knowledge related to peer services, youth-guided, family-driven care, community resources, empowerment strategies, and evidence-based or best practice approaches. We also want to seek out opportunities to enhance one's knowledge and skills through training, self-study, professional development, and collaboration. We want to seek out opportunities to collaborate with other peer professionals. So this could even look like if you work in a larger organization, maybe there's a youth peer advocate that works on another floor or another location that maybe you can just talk, even if it's on the phone or via email, if not in person, and say, like, what are some strategies that you use, right? Or warm handoffs with a youth's previous provider for peer support services, right? And saying, what did you notice was successful in your work with this youth? And that's something I noticed in my work that really worked, and just noticing that a prior support person could say, hey, like, when the youth shuts down, this is something that worked for me 100% of the time. Don't do this, or definitely do this when you see a meltdown coming on, right? Things like that. We also want to seek to incorporate effective practices and guidance and feedback from youth, colleagues, and supervisors to improve effectiveness. So from youth, that can be just being forthcoming and saying before you end a session, maybe once a month or every couple months, hey, how do you feel like these services are going? Is there anything we can do differently? How can I serve you better? Right? And just placing the power back in their hands. You might be the only person really asking or welcoming that feedback, and also letting them know, like, I'm not going to be mad at you if you don't like something about services, but I want to give you the best care possible. So some youth might be apprehensive because they might have people pleasing tendencies, and some youth might be already have a list mentally going ready to correct you and let you know what you can do better. And that's fine, just letting them know that you welcome that. And same goes with your colleagues and your supervisors, like, maybe, hey, is there anything I can do better in my documentation? I want to make sure that I'm giving the best support possible. And we want to engage in ongoing discussions with the people we support, our employers and our colleagues, regarding the YPA role. So if there's, maybe you attend a training and you learn, like, this is something that other YPAs are doing, can I incorporate that in my practice? Or this is something that I'm learning that might not be within the role of a YPA. Is this something we can scale back on? And just having that open line of communication. We also want to commit to partnership. So what that looks like is working to enhance one's understanding of all systems involved in the lives of young people and their families with complex needs. So if you're not working with a youth that's on a multidisciplinary team where you and your colleagues personally are the ones working with the youth, then maybe you need to make time to at least understand what is pins if they're involved in pins, or what are they doing in these therapy services if you don't have a relationship with that therapist or with that probation officer. Just understanding the range of support that they're experiencing so you can figure out where you fit into that as a YPA. We want to actively seek out opportunities to partner with clinicians and other professionals when possible and when appropriate. And this could be something you speak in supervision about. We want to keep informed about colleagues' areas of expertise and competencies and seek support from those who have demonstrated knowledge and competence related to the subject. So I know that's very wordy, but that can look like if you know the youth is working with a therapist who is forward in art therapy, and you have a youth that is, very skilled or interested in art, then just partnering with and seeing how we can amplify the strength of the youth in their services, right? That's just one way. Maybe it's music, maybe it's tech, right? We want to participate in and lead interdisciplinary teams that include young people and their families to promote holistic cross-system solutions. And one benefit of this is unfortunately, sometimes traumatizing events do happen. So if this happens to a youth that you're working with and they are sharing it with the med prescriber on your team, the med prescriber is, for whatever reason, the first person to hear the story, you want to make sure there's a line of communication there so the youth doesn't have to feel re-traumatized by continuing to tell the story over and over again to different providers when we could have just had a team meeting and talked amongst ourselves. We want to partner with a wide range of community organizations and resources to support young people to make connections to ongoing natural supports that reflect their culture, interests, and preferences. So multicultural groups, sports teams, affinity groups at the library, nonprofits. I know there was one nonprofit that I found in the upstate area that provided groceries, cooking lessons, and reading competency skills to read recipes. And so that was meeting three needs of a family right there. But just knowing, what is available in your area and what could possibly help the family. They can choose to accept it or not. And we also want to work with young people to develop their constructive self-advocacy skills to support their interactions with a wide range of professionals. So you're not going to be in every IEP meeting, doctor's appointment, med prescription meeting, therapy session. You're not going to be there for every time that they need to advocate for themselves. So just taking time to practice with them so that they can develop those skills and advocate for themselves. So also moving on to integrity. And like I said, if you have any questions or your wheels are turning or you're wondering, does this apply? How can I do this better? Definitely just come off of mute, stop me, or drop it in the chat. But moving on to integrity, we want to uphold and advance the values, ethics, knowledge, and mission of the YPA movement, which we do discuss more in the advanced training for anybody that has not taken that, by working toward the highest standard of YPA practice. So you are representing yourself as a YPA, your organization, and YPAs in general. There's a lot of youth and families that have never heard of a YPA before they met you. So they're learning about what a YPA is through the services you're providing. That's just something to keep in mind. We want to practice in opportunities to advance the YPA movement through learning collaborative activities, mentoring colleagues, research, presentations in the community. For example, Families Together has a conference annually that's coming up next week. That's an opportunity for networking and growth and professional development, different publications and training such as this. We want to continue to develop leadership skills when appropriate and demonstrate those skills, because whether you realize it or not, the youth you're working with are learning to mirror those skills that you're developing. So whether it's communication and having an open line of critique and criticism and accepting that with grace, whether it's leading in a session and placing boundaries, they're learning how to do that within their personal lives as well by watching you do that. We want to seek leadership roles and empower youth leadership and youth guided practices at all levels whenever possible. So just placing the power back in their hands, giving them the mic, and at any given point, just saying, what do you think about this? Do you think this could be any better in the way that we're providing the service? What's your opinion? Because like I said, you might be the only ones asking them that. They might not be used to that. So it can be a slow roll, but it will begin to get their wheels turning that, hey, like my feedback is valuable. My opinion is welcome in my own services. We want to promote and facilitate evaluation and research to contribute to the development of knowledge and improve practice of youth peer support and advocacy. And we want to act with integrity in relationships with youth, providers, and families in a way that promotes respect for the YPA workforce and improved outcomes for young people and their families. So just to check in, I know that was a lot of information, but before we move on, we're going to jump into an activity in which we're going to read a scenario on the screen. I'm going to ask a volunteer to actually come off of mute and read the scenario. And then as a group, we're going to determine how this may have violated the code of ethics. So if I could get one volunteer to come off of mute and just start reading this for us, that would be great. And thank you in advance. One volunteer, anybody that's willing and brave, it can feel a little awkward or uncomfortable.
Yeah, I'll read it.
Thanks.
No problem. Alex, a youth peer advocate, has been working with Jordan, a 17-year-old in foster care who struggles with anxiety and self-doubt. Jordan has been hesitant to speak up in meetings about their own needs, and Alex has been encouraging them to advocate for themselves. However, during a recent meeting with Jordan's care team, Alex made several mistakes that compromised their role as a YPA.
Okay, so if you were in this, then thank you, Trey. But if you were in this position as a YPA, where do you think the code of ethics could be violated, just with what we've reviewed so far? Kind of uses some imagination here, but just imagine you're in this scenario. Where could this go wrong? Where could this become a gray area where the youth is not empowered? You can put in the chat, come off of mute. We know this youth is anxious. We know they doubt themselves quite a bit. So that can probably look like a hesitancy to speak up and advocate for their own needs. We want to encourage them to advocate for themselves. That's not something they're really used to doing. And now we're in a team meeting. So, any ideas on how this can go wrong? Maybe what you've experienced or what you've seen where you were like, I don't know about that. As a YPA, that made me a little uncomfortable. It kind of got my YPA senses going. I know we have those. So, we have speaking over the youth during a team meeting, the youth tried to express their concerns about a housing transition, right? We know they're in foster care, but the YPA interrupted and spoke on their behalf, assuming they knew what was best for the youth without asking for their input. And this can probably be very well meaning. A lot of YPAs are fiercely protective. And that can be a great thing, but we have to know how to scale that back and apply it in appropriate and professional ways. And so speaking over the youth is definitely not doing that. We have ignoring family involvement. This is just, one imaginary scenario, but say the youth's aunt, who's been a supportive figure, expressed interest in being involved in their care plan, but the YPA dismissed the family's input, stating we don't really need family involved. I don't think it's best for the youth to handle this with family involvement, right? And so this is something I've definitely seen. If you are relating to the youth in a way that you can see yourself in them, and sometimes they'll disclose things that happen within the family that were not appropriate or okay. Sometimes we can hold this like grudge for the youth against the family, but as a YPA, that's definitely not appropriate. And we have to welcome families' input, even if we personally don't agree. In the meeting, when the youth asked about their rights regarding housing options, the YPA provided outdated and incorrect information instead of verifying facts with appropriate agencies. So if you don't have experience as a foster youth, for just the sake of this example, and you're saying something along the lines of like, oh yeah, when you turn 18, you can immediately get access to these resources because you just didn't know, or that's something you heard, but you didn't fact check, that can be devastating for a youth, right? And that can really mess up their progress in terms of treatment. So just making sure all of your information is up to date, especially if you're not familiar with the systems that they're involved in. Overstepping the YPA rule, something that can often happen. Say, for example, the YPA advised the youth to refuse a service plan recommended by professionals without offering the youth the full picture or allowing them to make an informed decision. So just because we don't specifically agree or we didn't like some of the terminology that the therapist put into the treatment plan, it is the youth's job to, one, make their own decision, and for two, it's our job to make sure that their decision is informed. So just looking at every piece of the picture as we see it as trained professionals and saying, here's what this means in plain terms. Here's what this would look like applied to your life as it stands now, and letting them decide what they believe would be best for them and just supporting them along the way. And then also lacking professional development. The YPA didn't attend maybe recent trainings about trauma-informed care and advocacy strategies, leading to mishaps in the provision of their treatment. So maybe they weren't even aware that being in foster care and living with housing insecurity can be traumatizing. To some people, that seems obvious, but if you don't have experience in that, maybe you didn't realize, oh, this youth is very traumatized right now. They're feeling unstable. And maybe they haven't attended trainings that let them know, like, as much as you want to fiercely advocate, which is good, it's not appropriate for you to speak over the youth at any point. So that's kind of what we're looking for. Any comments, concerns about where the YPA violated the code of ethics, or maybe you've done this and there's no shame in that. You felt like Alex, the YPA, before and you didn't realize that was wrong, or any ideas on how they could have handled that differently, what impact these actions could have had on the youth's confidence and independence. Imagine that somebody that you trust and respect as a mentor is now speaking over you and what you want. How might that make the youth feel? And then what steps, this is the most important piece that I would really like us to touch on, if nothing else. What steps could the YPA take to correct this approach moving forward? So what actions can be taken for accountability after something like this happens? That's wildly inappropriate, but unfortunately very common. Yeah, yeah. This can be very uncomfortable for the YPA, right? I mean, I'm sorry, for the youth, feeling like maybe their opinions weren't that important, or, they're already self-doubting and now they're getting spoken over. So maybe they're like, maybe I don't know what's best for me. Maybe I was wrong. It could make them feel stupid, unfortunately, if they thought this was right and now someone's that they trust and is in a position of power is saying, no, that's wrong. Let's do this instead without any context. Thank you. I'll give us some time if we need to think about it. You can come off of mute or put in the chat specifically what steps could be taken to correct a situation like this. Because I think if we're working with youth and families, because we are human, inevitably there will be times where we make mistakes. And so what happens after that? How do we reconcile in those situations? This can be something from your personal life if you don't want to talk too much about professional mistakes. I know that can be a little taboo. I know I've made them. One kind of proactive step that I like to take with youth when I first get to know them is just let them know, like, hey, I'm human, and sometimes I might offend you, or I might say something that you don't like, or I might make a mistake, but I welcome your correction. And you can always tell me when that happens, and I won't get mad, but I'll consider it and I'll thank you for telling me the truth. Yeah, one-on-one and just saying sorry. I like that you kept it very simple. Like after the meetings, if it's not, and uncomfortable, like all eyes are on the youth at this treatment plan meeting, like just taking them aside one-on-one and saying, I messed up. I got excited or I got a little angry, honestly, at what they were saying to you, and I overstepped. I'm sorry. Just keeping it simple. And like I said, you might be the only one offering this type of terminology to the youth. They might not be receiving apologies from, especially from adults. Sometimes culturally, like we were talking about, that is not a thing. So just making the time to be humble and say, I'm sorry. I'm going to do my best to let that not happen again. Thank you for your forgiveness if you're willing and able to offer that. All right, we're going to move on. Thank you for your feedback. If you have anything that comes to mind about this, like I said, you can put it in the chat and we'll circle back to it. So specifically bringing it back to the competencies of the Code of Ethics, we have discussed the violations that we're looking at are in terms of empowerment and self-determination. The YPA didn't empower the youth to voice their concerns. Instead, they spoke over them and made decisions for them. Commitment to youth, the YPA failed to support family involvement, even though the youth's aunt wanted to help, ignoring the principle of viewing families as part of the solution. There was competence as a YPA. The YPA provided incorrect information about housing, which could mislead the youth and affect their decision making. There was a violation of commitment to partnership. The YPA didn't collaborate with other professionals or seek guidance from colleagues, which resulted in poor advocacy. And there was a violation of integrity by acting independently rather than empowering the youth and providing accurate information. The YPA failed to uphold the ethical standards of the YPA role. So like I said, when you're out in the field, you're in these multidisciplinary meetings, whatever they may be regarding with the youth, it's very easy for gray areas to occur. Like we're looking at it on paper or on screen in black and white right now, and it seems so obvious and so clear, but in a matter of minutes, all of these things can be violated. So it's just something to consider. So we're going to move on to section 2 now, which is boundaries. We're going to look at diversity and respect, ethical integrity, conflicts of interest, and personal relationships. So in terms of respect for diversity, we want to make sure that we do not practice, condone, facilitate, or collaborate in any form of discrimination on the basis of ethnicity, race, sex, sexual orientation, age, religion, national origin, marital status, political belief, mental or physical disability, military or veteran status, socioeconomic status, immigration status, or any other preference or personal characteristic, condition, or state. And this can seem very obvious, right? Like, I don't think anybody wakes up and wants to practice, hateful language or harmful language with their youth when they go to work, right? But from my lived experience, one example I had was a youth. I was driving her around in my car, and because she had experienced, and this is a trigger warning for sexual predatory behavior, she had been targeted online by an older man of a certain ethnicity, that whenever she saw somebody that looked like him, a trauma response and a defense mechanism was to make slurs about people that look like him. And so we had to have conversations where if I didn't address that in a sensitive, trauma-informed way, that could be condoning and facilitating hateful and discriminatory language and actions, which of course that is not what I want to do at any time, but it could be, in my own experience, very easy to have done that. So that's just something to consider and to kind of like remove the shame off of, is that sometimes these situations happen and we don't know what to do. But this is a place where we can talk about that, hopefully without judgment, and without shame. So moving on to the next piece, we want to understand and identify situations in which one's biases are interfering with the ability to work with a young person and their natural supports and seek guidance from a supervisor. And this takes a lot of accountability and introspection, right? And humility to be able to say, this might be problematic, or this could possibly be a blind spot that I have, or this happened I didn't show up the way I wanted to show up, but I think I can do better. And to just begin to get maybe continued education, to work it out in supervision, to speak with other peers on strategies that they have. And this is a place where you have an abundance of peers and wealth in the room. So this is an opportunity. Just saying, I know it's very tricky and taboo, but how will the youth receive the best services possible if we're not able to be honest with ourselves about these things? We also want to seek to understand and demonstrate insight, knowledge, and awareness of our own power and privilege. One way that I like to do this in my practice is when I'm entering into a youth's care team, I'll let them know. I know that, it seems like I'm kind of like wearing this imaginary white coat, like maybe I'm like your therapist or like your doctor, but really I'm just a peer. And yes, I am a mandated reporter, or yes, I do write notes about our sessions, but I have lived experience just like you, even if it doesn't look the exact same. And that's why I'm here, is to hopefully give you hope and support your healing. And that kind of checks the fact that they might see you in a role of power, and there might be skewed dynamics because of that. Okay. We also want to respect the rights, dignity, cultural identity, and preferences of those who we work with. I'm going to check the chat. Okay, yes. We want to advocate and promote respect, cultural and linguistic competence at all times and in all relationships. So feel free to put it in the chat if you have experience with this, but just posing this for our thought. What do we do if we work with a youth who their caretakers don't speak English? How do we make sure that we're having respect for diversity in those moments, right? How can we make sure that we're involving the family, even though we don't speak the same language? There could be a language barrier without putting all the onus on the youth. Just something to think about. And this is just a practical example of where this kind of arises and can become very murky, right? Is there an app you can use? Is there a way that your organization can provide an interpreter? Is there ways you can plan beforehand by having all the forms they need to sign in their home language as well as English so they can understand, right? We want to recognize cultural, individual, and role differences and demonstrate competence in providing services that are sensitive to the individual's cultures. A translation line, yes, absolutely. That's a great resource. So hopefully if somebody here, if you haven't heard of that or need that service, that's something that you can kind of get your wheels turning on. We want to seek to understand, accept, and appreciate one's own culture as the basis for relating to the cultures of others. So it's very easy, and I don't know how you all feel, but I've heard many people say, I don't have a culture, or I don't know what my culture is because I'm just white, or I don't know what my culture is because of slavery, right? And actually, we all have a culture that influences the way that we see the world. So taking time to reflect on this and understand it and appreciate it so that we can do the same for others. We also want to seek training and consultation to improve our ability to work effectively with individuals from diverse groups. I know we've had people in the advanced training, and I thank them for their bravery, their transparency in sharing things like this, but they would say things like, where I live is predominantly white, and I don't have that much experience with working with diverse groups, and I need help. And that's just a great way to, or I don't have experience working with people where I have to use different pronouns. I need help with that. And that's just a great way to start. Like, how can you, provide those services if you don't open the door to say, hey, I'm not very good at this right now. Can you all help me, right? And point me in the right direction. So that's just after some time to accept and reflect, that's where you're at. Then you can start to build on those skills. Okay, so we're going to look at ethical integrity now. We want to act in accordance with the laws and statutes regarding all issues that affect the YPA's work. We want to assure that one's conduct does not compromise the fulfillment of responsibilities as a YPA. We want to promote and support honesty, integrity, and transparency. which means not participating in or condoning or being associated with dishonesty, fraud, or deception. And we go into this a little bit more in depth in the advanced training too. Distinguishing clearly between statements made and actions taken as a private individual and a representative of the YPA workforce employer or credentialing organization. So sometimes youth can ask questions to you that might be a little bit past your professional comfortability. So just being able to set boundaries, right, in situations like that. We want to make sure we're not exploiting professional relationships for personal gain. One example that we look over in the YPA training is, say, for example, you're providing a service for the youth and a group of youth, right? Say a group of young boys who are good at mechanical automotive things. And then you go to leave and your tire's flat. It might seem harmless to allow them to change your tire if they offer, but that would actually be exploiting your professional relationship for personal gain. And so it's just something to think about. There's like safety liabilities and all types of issues with that. But one way that that is problematic and a violation of the code of ethics is that's exploitative because that's a paid service of a professional and you're allowing the youth you work with to do it for you. We also want to not use undue influence or in any way exploit the trust of the youth and their families to whom we are providing services. I think it's just important too, in circling back to power and privilege, to remember that it is a privilege to have very intimate and personal access into these youth and families' lives, homes, healing journeys, and they are choosing to trust us and to let us in. So we want to make sure that we're stewarding that trust well. We also don't want to accept gifts of significant value from those with whom the YPA works and consult with the YPA agency's policy. So sometimes the only way people know how to show appreciation is through overgiving. And we want to make sure we're not exploiting that, but that can be something that you look at within your agency. Sometimes that doesn't apply if maybe the family offers you a slice of cultural bread that they just love and they want to experience it with you. If they're offering you a slice of bread versus like an expensive necklace that their grandmother gave them, right? It's a little bit different, but definitely check in with your agency policies as well. And we want to recognize the situations that involve ethical dilemmas and consult with our supervisors and colleagues regularly to seek appropriate resolutions. And I just can't say it enough. Definitely lean on your supervisors for support. That's what they're there for. I think it's very easy sometimes for us to not like be mentally prepared for supervision and just kind of say to ourselves as peers, like, okay, anything they want to say or bring up or correct me on, I'll just go to my 1 hour meeting for that. But we can have things that we bring to the agenda too. So just keeping that in mind. Okay, looking at conflicts of interest now, we want to be alert to and avoid conflicts of interest and inform our supervisor that the young person and their families might have potential for a conflict that exists. And if you live or work in a small town, this is a lot more frequent, right? Where you might have, say, went to school with the older sibling, or the family goes to your same church, or whatever it might be, that could be problematic. So that's something to bring up to your supervisor. And we want to resolve conflicts of interest in a manner that protects the young person and their family's interests, right? Just remembering we are the professionals, so it's our job to address those things. We also don't want to engage in dual relationships with young people and their families if there is any risk of harm to the family. If these relationships are unavoidable, take steps to protect the young person and set clear boundaries. So you might be in a situation where your program or your organization allows youth to come in and game after school, and you have like an Xbox or a PlayStation or whatever it might be, and they're gaming, and that's fine. But what we don't want to do is give them your game tag or handle and be chatting with them at 3 in the morning on Discord. I'm trying to use all the terminology because I'm not a gamer, but I think you all know what I mean. Like, we don't want to cross those lines. So there's certain things that are appropriate and there's certain things that are definitely a conflict of interest. Okay, so looking into personal relationships, the YPA shall not engage in sexual activities or sexual contact with any member of a family currently or formerly receiving services. We also don't want to provide services to young people or their family members with whom the advocate has had a prior sexual relationship. So, I used to date their cousin. That would be a conflict of interest. We don't want to engage in sexual activities or sexual contact with relatives or others with whom the young person or family members have close personal relationships when there is a risk of potential exploitation or harm to the young person. And the YPA should also make sure to follow all agency policies in regard to personal relationships. So we're going to, after all of this information, I know it's a lot, we're going to do another activity now where we're going to be matching the definition that's on the screen to the corresponding code of ethics standard that we have discussed. Okay, so I have some potential answers on here for you all. If I say promote the well-being and independence of youth while keeping with all applicable laws, would you say it's A, empowerment, B, commitment to youth, or C, competence? You can put it in the chat. Come off of mute. It seems like we're not a big come off of mute team. That's fine. Just put it in the chat for me, whatever your answer might be. It's okay if you get it wrong. No one's going to shame you or laugh at you. Okay, we have A. Thanks, Austin. Promoting the well-being and independence of youth while keeping with all applicable laws. Anybody else, or do we all just think A? A, B, or C? Last call. Okay. So it's actually B, commitment to youth. But thank you for your submission. Okay, what about this one? Definition matching. Uphold and advance the values, ethics, knowledge, and mission of the YPA movement by working towards the highest standard of YPA practice. I know that was a lot of words, but would you think it's A, integrity, B, empowerment, or C, commitment to partnership? Uphold and advance the values, ethics, knowledge, and mission of the YPA movement by working towards the highest standard of practice. What do we think? You can put it in the chat, A, B, or C. No ideas? Are we scared to get it wrong, maybe? Okay, thank you, Cindy. C, commitment to partnership. Okay. It's actually A, integrity. Thank you for your submission, though. We have work to enhance one's understanding of all systems involved in the lives of young people and their families with complex needs. Do we have A, competence, B, commitment to partnership, C, commitment to youth? Okay, I see Trey put A. I don't know if that was for the last one or this one, but we might have A, competence, B from Austin, commitment to partnership. Okay. Okay. This is a hard one, in my opinion. C, commitment to youth, working to enhance one's understanding of all the systems involved in the lives of young people and their families with complex needs. Maybe they have physical training, they have therapy, they have pins, they got in some trouble with the law, and then they have peer support services, and they also have a family peer advocate. So that's kind of what it's saying. Like we're understanding what all is going on in terms of service provision. Okay, C. So we have a couple for C. Let's see. It's actually B. So this would be commitment to partnership because we're partnering with the youth and all the other providers in their lives. Thank you all for your feedback. Okay, so moving on, this is going to be our last section of competencies before we move on to violation procedures. But just looking at documentation, this could be something that's new for a lot of us, is consistently providing accurate documentation. I know that can be very difficult, and we go over that in the advanced training in depth. But we're going to look at informed consent, access to records, which is something I'm very passionate about, confidentiality, and responsibilities when credentialed. Okay, so informed consent looks like clearly explaining YPA services and encouraging informed participation. So like I said, a lot of youth and families don't know what a YPA is. Like your average person on the street does not know what that is. So just making sure we're explaining why we're even in their care team, what our role is and how we can benefit them from the very beginning, just so they are clear on, what's happening. And it's not just like this services is happening to them, but they have a say in it. We also want to provide information about the YPA service to the youth and families in a manner that is thorough and understandable to them. And that's considering their reading language, their reading level, their native language, and verbal explanation. So sometimes something that's helpful is, I know a lot of YPAs have taken the time to make a little printout of what the YPA role is and isn't, or just a little bit about how they plan to provide services. And it's just a quick blurb. Maybe you're on Canva, maybe you write it out, and the family can put it on their fridge so that if you're talking to them for 5, 10, 15 minutes, and a lot of it goes in one ear, not the other, they have key takeaways in a way that is more recognizable and easy to comprehend for them. That's just one strategy that I've heard of that I really liked and respected. We advocate for youth and families to receive current, accurate, transparent information from other providers. And we also want to support young people and families to ask questions and obtain more information to help them participate in the planning and service delivery process. And sometimes they might have questions. They might not understand, oh, I thought the youth act team did this, or oh, I thought a youth peer advocate did this. And you can say, no, not actually, or here's what we can do instead. Okay, so in accessing records, we want to help youth access records and documentation collaboratively. We want to assist them, young people and their families, in obtaining access to records regarding their care as needed and advocating for their rights and addressing concerns. And we want to keep notes concerning work with the young person in a manner that's transparent and done in partnership with them. And just something to note is that when we're writing notes, we want to make sure we're using strength-based language, that we're not assuming things about them, but we're stating plainly what is true about what we're taking notes on and documenting. And it's just something to be mindful of, that I worked with a family before that requested access to records, and there was some pushback from some of the providers because of the language that they used in documentation, not realizing that the families had every right to access this. And they had been through some medical trauma before, the families. And so it was very important for them to have all of their records in a place that was easily organized and in a way that they could comprehend. So if anything happened like they experienced in their past that was traumatizing, they would have at least the documentation to kind of support, no, this is the treatment plan, this is what we've been doing, and this is what we're not going to do, pretty much. So I took time to make a binder for that family and organize it and create space for future records. And that's just one way that made them comfortable with engaging in services and kind of pushed back on that medical trauma that they had experienced. Okay, so moving on to confidentiality, we want to protect the privacy and disclose information only as legally required and avoid public discussions. So respecting privacy and confidentiality of young people and their families is always going to be in accordance with the law. So just making sure we're aware of what that looks like in terms of HIPAA and things like that. We want to share confidential information only when necessary and with valid consent, unless required by law to prevent serious harm. So this would be an area where like the mental hygiene laws come into place, where it's just I'm just saying it over and over so you all can do your own research, or maybe ask your supervisors what agency policies look like around mental hygiene law. But once youth turn 12, they have a certain level of control in terms of consents that they are allowed to sign and actually required to sign. So whatever services are provided by your organization, how much information can be shared with other providers is determined by their consent according to the mental hygiene law. We want to clearly explain situations where you may need to report information for safety reasons. So letting youth know, like, I do want to keep your trust. And I want to make sure that you can be open and honest with me. But if I feel like you're going to be a harm to yourself or to others, I will have to X, Y, and Z. And just letting them know that so that they have the informed consent with what they choose to disclose to you. We also want to notify young people and families when confidential information is disclosed, whether by consent or legal requirement. Like if you have to make a mandated report, just letting them know, like, hey, this is what happened, and maybe you might need support from a supervisor for that, but that's something that kind of respects the youth and families. We also want to protect all records from unauthorized access, including electronic files, emails, faxes, or if you're the type of person that takes paper and pen notes when you're providing a session or treatment with youth, making sure that that's not just like sitting out in the open for everyone to read with their names or their first and last name, whatever it might be, but maybe just using initials and locking that away in a desk, right, where not anybody and everybody can read your treatment notes. Only discuss private information in secure settings, never in public spaces. Just something to be mindful of. Say, you're working in a multidisciplinary team and you're discussing with the therapist your session, but you all are in the kitchen getting coffee, and anyone from any program can overhear what happened with little so-and-so yesterday, right? That would not be appropriate, and that would certainly be a violation of the Code of Ethics. Okay, so our responsibilities when credentialed as an applicant or credentialed individual, it's our duty to maintain current on any applicable fees, to comply with the Code of Ethics and requirements set by the Youth Peer Advocate Credential Advisory Committee. We want to only use the designation of the YPA or represent ourselves as having a credential when we are in full compliance with the credentialing requirements. And we want to cooperate with any ethics investigations by the credentialing organization, which would be Families Together in this case, or government agency, and truthfully represent and disclose facts. Okay, so we're going to do a quick activity. For each scenario that you're going to see, we want to determine who's leading, what barriers might there be to prevent it from being youth guided, who's affected, and how you would correct it. Just letting that soak in. So who's leading, what barriers, who's affected, and how to correct. Okay. All right. So a YPA has been invited by the young person to a meeting at the school. The team is discussing a possible plan for the youth to receive additional services at school. The youth is apprehensive the entire meeting and doesn't give much reassurance that they're going to follow through. Upon leaving, the care coordinator pulls the YPA aside and says, just know I work with young people all the time. Eventually, they're going to see what needs to happen. So what's going on here? Who's leading? What barriers are we seeing? Who's affected? And how could we correct this? If you have any input, you can put in the chat, come off of mute, even if it's just to who's leading, if it's just to what barriers, who's affected, or how we can correct. It doesn't have to be to all four. Or is this completely normal and acceptable? I'll take silence as this is good, and this is what you think should be happening. Otherwise, you can put it in the chat or come off of mute. Wow, that's powerful language. If you'd like to share more, Austin says young person is being treated as an object. Wow. If you'd like to elaborate on that at all. That's unfortunate. It's sad, but it does happen. I know I've definitely felt like that as a youth receiving services. So yeah, that's very powerful language. Anybody else? Who's leading? Is the youth leading? Is the YPA leading? Obviously, the youth has feelings they want to express, but aren't asking the youth their input. Yeah, I didn't see anybody ask the youth how they feel about this treatment plan. So, yeah, great point. The youth doesn't feel involved. Yeah, they're just kind of there, even though the whole reason for the meeting is them. Nobody's asking their opinion. Okay, great. If you have continued input, don't hesitate to put in the chat or come off of mute. But in this scenario, the care coordinator is leading. The young person's voice is being ignored, and it impacts the youth because they're not getting their needs met. And it impacts the entire team by imposing a plan that won't be followed through. So, I mean, we can put a treatment plan in place, but if the youth refuses, it's genuinely pointless. This situation could be corrected by allowing the young person to share what they feel could best work to support their needs. And if they're not comfortable in that setting, because I know I've worked with youth who had treatment plan meetings that went this way and they were like, I'm never going to that again. Like you will have to drag me in there by my feet if you want to get me another meeting. So you might need to meet with them one-on-one or maybe two-on-one with a representative from the school and just have it be not an entire meeting after that, but some way and somehow the youth need to be able to share their feelings and what they feel they can actually commit to. Okay, so a YPA has been working with the young person for a few weeks now, and they're excited with the help they're getting. Their supervisor comes to the YPA and shares that the young person and family have been bragging about everything the YPA has been doing for them, calling places for the young person to ask questions, putting all their appointments in the calendar. The family's like, this is amazing. I love this YPA. When the supervisor expresses concern, the YPA feels hurt, possibly offended, and responds, I'm just being helpful. So what's going on here? Who's leading? What's the problem? How can it be corrected? Or is this good? Is this what we do? No shade. The YPA is leading, doing things for the youth and the families. Yeah. Specifically calling places that can be like enabling and kind of be a crutch. If you are always calling for resources and information for the youth, how would they ever get over their phone anxiety if they have it? Like when they're adults and they're not even eligible for YPA services, how are they going to make a dentist appointment if you're always calling for them, right? Putting appointments in the calendar, that's not allowing them to develop their own organizational skills and accountability. So how could we correct this? And thank you, Austin, for your input. What can we do instead then? If it's you, maybe you would like someone to do this for you. If it's like a little sibling, maybe you're like, whatever, I'm just going to do it for you. But as a YPA in a professional setting, it's not appropriate. So what could we do instead? We could sit with them, right? So, okay, support them making the appointments. Yes, and sitting with them as they make the appointments. Yeah. And there might be times too where like you're sitting with them and that's still not enough. And they're like, I'm dying. Like I can't do that. Just helping them to like maybe say, excuse me, just a moment, muting it, taking a deep breath, right? Or coaching them on here's how we can progress the conversation so you can get out of this uncomfortable situation that you hate, right? Here's what we can do, right? Or showing them like how to set up Google Calendar, things like that, brainstorming ideas on how they can organize their calendar. Yeah, calendars are very personal, however people like to do it. There's endless possibilities on what works for your brain and the way that you organize and process information. So just kind of playing with them about it and making it fun. There's bullet journaling. You don't even have to do it digitally. You can do it by hand. I know Dollar Tree has calendars. Great input. Okay, so the YPA is definitely leading in this scenario. The young person is not being supported to make informed choices, but rather the YPA is doing everything for them. This impacts the young person because they're not being supported in learning things that can contribute to their independence. This situation could be corrected if the YPA worked with the young person and coached them in the skills needed for them to follow through with these activities independently. Okay, so a YPA, excuse me, is preparing for a youth workshop on knowing your rights in special education. The YPA has 7 young people confirmed to attend this workshop. They enlist the help of coworkers and the supervisor to put the workshop together. That morning, calls were made by the office to remind the youth, hey, we have this workshop going on today. The YPA arrives early to the session and has everything all set for the young people. The YPA wants to be sure that everything is perfect before the young people get there. Staff are assigned to lead different parts of the agenda. So who's leading? What do we see going on here? Is there anything wrong? I know this is a hard one. This is kind of a brain twister right now. But the YPA and the agency are leading in this scenario. Young people have no input or enthusiasm to attend the event. I know it can seem like they're doing everything right with great intentions, but for example, they're setting up everything and they're getting to the session early to have everything set for the young people. Youth can do that. And that's a transferable skill. Like if we put the autonomy back in their hands and realize they're capable of as much as we allow them and teach them and train them to, that can go on their resume and they can be ready to start working in these types of environments if we gave them the chance rather than assuming we had to do everything for them or we wanted to save them by doing it for them. So it might not meet their needs, right? Because we don't know because we did everything for them. So as much as we want to set everything up, we don't actually know what they need. We're setting it up according to what we think they need. This situation could be corrected by working with youth to get their input into the whole entire process, such as the topic subject, questions they have, providing input, supporting the event itself through setup and facilitation. So think about this, something as simple as if I am the service provider, me and my team, we're going to set up a bunch of chairs and a table in the front facing the chairs so that the speakers can look at the youth, right? What if the youth say, I don't like feeling like I'm being talked at. Can we set the chairs up in a circle and we can all look at each other so we can feel like we're equally respected? That might not be something you would have thought of, but if you don't ask, you wouldn't know. What's the best way to promote autonomy? That's such a good question. We will circle back to that in the Q&A. And also feel free, like I said, we all have a wealth of knowledge in this room. So I'll answer, but if anyone else wants to answer, please do, because I respect y'all's opinion as well. Okay, so for the sake of time, if you have any questions, like you just saw, please put it in the chat and we have a little bit of time at the end to address them. I'm gonna move on to the next section, but as you're thinking of questions, just put them in the chat. We have our moderators collecting all those questions and they definitely will be addressed. So if you have any questions, thoughts, reflections, concerns about what we've discussed so far in the YPA Code of Ethics, just drop them there and we'll get to them. Okay, but moving on to the procedures and policy and violation policy. We want to overview the reporting process and discuss preventing ethics violations. This is super important, so I just wanted to make sure we get to this. When a code of ethics violation investigation arises, this is what it looks like. Complaints can be submitted to Families Together by either a family or supervisor, and they're reviewed by the Training and Workforce Development Department. So that's myself, Jay, our supervisor, and a few others. Next, the Youth Peer Advocate Credential Advisory Committee formally investigates the complaint and votes on an appropriate course of action. So this is a group of right now about 10 people. We have peers, we have Families Together staff, stakeholders, which are either a supervisor or somebody who's aged out of the peer role, and we're experts in the role of a YPA. And if you're interested about that, you can put that in the chat and we can give you more information on how to join the YPA Credential Advisory Committee if that's something you think you'd be interested in. But we talk about it, we review it in depth. Sometimes we have subcommittee meetings and we say, hey, what needs to happen next? And if legal violations are suspected, then authorities are notified. The YPA is given an opportunity to submit a written response when Families Together reaches out to them and says, hey, we received this concern, this complaint. Here's what we think needs to happen. They're allowed to submit an appeal and a written response. And then extensions for these responses are granted upon request. Sometimes it's very upsetting and they need more time to kind of state their case and where they're coming from in the situation. The YPA is given an opportunity to appeal the Credential Advisory Committee's decision if they disagree. And that's also given time, extended time if needed. Possible consequences when this occurs, which is very rare. Thankfully, we try to make sure we provide a wealth of training to prevent these things from happening. But when they do, what can happen is a revocation of credential. So your YPA status can be removed or revoked. You can have required continuing education before you continue as a peer or advance as a peer. We would say, hey, we need you to take this many hours of this many trainings in order to get you where you need to be to provide these services. Or we might temporarily suspend the credential and say, hey, like, we want to make sure you're doing well as a person before you continue on as a peer. So these are typically the course of action that would take place. Okay, so that was all in terms of content. Thank you all for sticking around and for your feedback and just for your faces being here. If you have final questions that come up after this training, you can email ctac.info@nyu.edu. You can also email ypacredential@ftnys.org. Hopefully, maybe Jay could put that in the chat to reach us at Families Together. And we can also email you the Code of Ethics. It's on our website, but if you're struggling to find it, we can email it to you so you can have it for your review. And I'll pass it over to Jay now.
Thank you. Thank you, Yasmin. So we had, I think, don't see any questions at this time on the document, so we can just skip ahead to the upcoming events. And you'll see that there's a survey in the chat that was posted up by Vanessa. So some upcoming events. We have Navigating Non-Suicidal Self-Injury with Families, Clinical Insights into Self-Injury, Youth Needs, and Caregiver Support Part 2. So that's going to be May 15th from 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. Oh. Oh. Sorry, can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I was having some technical difficulties there. So that's going to be May 15th, 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. And then we're going to have the Family Peer Advocate version of the Code of Ethics training on May 20th from 12 to 1:30. So if you know any family peer advocates or anybody who would be interested in that, they can go on the CTAC website and register for that.
Thank you. I did see one question in the chat. What's the best way to promote autonomy? So I'll give my perspective, and anyone else in the room, literally, please take the floor. But I would say just, I think it's more internal. Like when we think about that, we could look at the youth and like, how can I make you more autonomous? But checking in with yourself, like how often are we handing over the mic? How often are we checking in for their feedback and their criticism and welcoming it? Like that's something we could honestly do. Any service provider could do every time you see the youth, but do we? And why not? So just kind of fostering those opportunities for them to even be autonomous, because they're likely not going to interrupt your service plan or your treatment plan for the 2 hours or so that you have together to give you criticism. They're probably not going to do that as, youth. So just how many pockets of space are we holding for them to lead and for them to critique and for them to share their opinions? That's just something I like to do personally in general in my life. Like, hey, like, how do you feel about this? I think it's going well, but it's not just about me. There's two of us here. So how are you feeling? So just kind of holding space is what I would say. But anyone else, please feel free to share. I'm going to stop sharing screen so I can see y'all's faces. Okay, we're camera off. Got it. Anyone else? Okay. Well, thank you all for being here. I hope that you gained a lot. If you want to stay back and ask any questions, like just with the staff here, you can. Other than that, we'll see you at the next training, hopefully, and you can always reach out to us via email if you have any additional questions, comments, or concerns. Have a great rest of your day.